Hi guys, this is Vidas and welcome to another tutorial for today. This week I'm going to teach you how to avoid forbidden intervals in your harmonizations or improvisations or compositions if you are creating in a tonal style. Basically, forbidden intervals are perfect octaves, unisons and fifths. The reason they are forbidden is because each voice has to be as individual and independent as possible. And if you move both voices at the same time with the parallel interval, then they will be less independent. Let's say a fifth, open fifth, C to G. You decide to move to F to C. That's parallel fifths, forbidden. Or downward from C to G, also forbidden. And it happens in chords as well, not only in just two voices, but in chords. And we're going to talk about chords here, how to connect those chords in a smooth fashion that you would avoid those forbidden intervals. It's very important to know this rule and not very difficult to avoid actually once you understand the theory. And the theory is very simple. The forbidden interval is a perfect interval, like unison, octave, or a fifth. They consider it perfect because when they sound together, they don't produce any beats, right? They are perfect and not even without beats, but they are like empty sounding intervals, like this. This is an interval of the perfect fifth, C to G, or an octave, C to C. Perfect interval. Therefore, octave to octave, C to DD, CC DD is forbidden, like in this interval, in this chord. It's not good, yeah, to move both voices in the same direction if you have a perfect interval, unison, octave, or a fifth. Perfect fourths in parallel motion are allowed because they're inversions of fifths, and they sound less actually perfect than fifths, and therefore they're frequently used in parallel motion with the 6 chords, let's say, right? So now you know why it is forbidden. Of course, if you have parallel thirds or 6, it's very beautiful to do parallel motion, right? Not all the time, but once in a while. Yes, or this. Parallel 6 or thirds. They are not forbidden. They are sweet sounding intervals, and they're not empty sounding. They are full, and a 6 chord like this sound perfectly well in a harmonic version as well, even with parallel 6 and parallel thirds. But they don't have parallel octaves or parallel fifths here. Okay, so back to the main question, how to avoid parallel fifths, octaves, and unisons. There are 3 rules, 3 ways to avoid basically. One is use contrary motion between the voices. Second is use as much stepwise motion as possible in other voices, and one voice needs to be stationary if possible. We'll talk about that. And the third one is avoid forbidden intervals with leaps. You can jump from one interval to another, and this way you could also avoid. All right, so I'm going to show you the keyboard, vintage Harmonium, vintage Harmona 85. Hopefully you will see what I mean here. I'm going to show you all the keys here. Yeah, like this. All right. Like this. Excellent. So let's imagine we are in C major key, right? And I'm going to demonstrate the first method. Basically, you move chords in opposite direction. Forbidden interval in this tonic chord, maybe this way, between C, E, G and C is this octave between the outer voices, and this fifth between the bass and the alto. So then if you have, let's say, a chord which is fourth or a fifth apart from the tonic, which is, let's say, the dominant chord, from the fifth scale degree, G major chord, you should move. One of the ways to avoid parallel fifths and octaves is to move the bass in one direction, this way downward to G, but the three other voices upward, right, in opposing directions than the bass, to the closest chordal note of the next chord. So C, E, G, C becomes G, G, B, D. So what happens with this fifth? Fifth goes to a third plus 2 octaves, but basically it's still a third in terms of harmony. What happens with the octave? Octave becomes a fifth, so no parallel forbidden intervals here. And if you move backward, the same rule applies here. Just bass goes up and the other voices go down. In minor key, let's say A minor, so let's say I want to use let's say subdominant chord, D minor, right, from the fourth scale degree, and then this forbidden interval is D, A, a perfect fifth. It's of course not forbidden to use in one chord, it's just forbidden to connect to the same interval in the next chord, fifth to a fifth, right? A perfect fifth to diminished fifth would be okay, actually, but perfect fifth and perfect fifth would not be okay. So let's say I want to connect subdominant and the tonic. I cannot use this way, jump all the voices downward. That's another rule which is actually broken, not to use all the voices in one direction, right? At least one voice needs to be either stationary or move in opposite direction with other voices. So when all the voices go down, not only we have this rule broken, but also parallel octaves and parallel fifths. So instead of this, we could use bass goes down by perfect fourth, and the other three voices go up in the nearest chordal position of the next chord of the tonic, like this. So that was rule number 1. Okay, rule number 2, which is actually even simpler to do, is harmonic progression. If one voice is stationary and other voices move by stepwise to the next chordal note of the next chord. The first rule that we applied in contrary motion, it was called melodic progression. All the voices actually move, and therefore it's melodic progression. So it's of course opposing directions, but still it's no voices stationary. Here in the second way of connecting those two chords, at least one voice, or at least one voice, sometimes two voices, is stationary. And that happens when the both chords are a perfect fifth or a perfect fourth apart. Let's say, back to the keyboard view. Let's say again we are in C major, tonic chord, connecting tonic chord C, C, E, G with the dominant. Because C major has 3 notes, C, E, G, and dominant has 3 notes, G, B, D, and both chords have one common note, G. So in this case, this G stays in place in soprano. Bass could go either upward to G by perfect fifth or downward by perfect fourth. It doesn't matter, because one voice is stationary, and now the other two voices, alto and tenor, move in parallel motion with each other to the next chordal note. Stepwise motion, basically. Major third, minor third, basically parallel thirds. Alright, tonic and dominant. It could be, let's say, subdominant and tonic as well, or this way. Subdominant F major chord and C major chord tonic has one common note, C. F, A, C, C, E, G. Both chords have one common note, C. So it stays in place, and then bass goes down. It could jump upwards too, if we had this. Even this way, unison in harmony is not forbidden, so tenor and bass could actually play C, C in harmony. It's just more fun to use wider, sometimes, position. And two upper voices, alto and soprano, move downward to the closest chordal notes of the next chord of the tonic in parallel motion. That's it. That's the second basically way of connecting those chords. Yeah. So then the third one is actually with leaps. You sometimes have 6 chord, and 6 chord is like a first inversion chord of the 3 note chord. In C major, tonic first inversion chord could be E, G, C, right? That's first inversion chord. Or in the dominant could be B, D, G, in subdominant A, C, F. They are 6 chords, and most often those actually leaps involve those 6 chords, first inversion chords. Alright, so let's back up to the keyboard view one more time. And imagine we have a dominant 4/2 chord. Dominant 7th chord is this, dominant in C major, G, B, D, F. So next position 6/5 chord, next position 4/3 chord, and F, G, B, D is 4/2 chord, like this. So I could have various dispositions of 4/2 chords actually, and let's find some fifth, like this. F, B, G, D. If we apply leaps, it's forbidden, because those voices involve perfect fifths. You cannot jump from one perfect fifth to another perfect fifth. It's still a parallel fifth, right? But if it is perfect fourth, then we could have a leap. Right? So there is no forbidden interval here. It's augmented fourth, major 6, and 9th. No perfect fifth, no octave. But if we have, let's say, dominant chord, G, B, D, G, we have 2 forbidden intervals, perfect fifth and octave, perfect octave. So if we jump the same way that we did with the 4/2 chord, instead of F we have G in the bass. Fourth jumps to fourth, and what happens is an octave becomes a 6, right? It's no longer a strictly melodic progression, it involves leaps. Some call it actually mixed progression, because there is stepwise motion and there is also a leap. Stepwise motion is between B and C in the tenor. Right? That's perfectly allowed if you involve leaps to connect 2 chords, and then this perfect fifth between the bass and the alto becomes minor thirds or minor 10th, which is a third plus an octave, and it is allowed, right? Basically you still apply opposite motion, contrary motion. in this way. Yeah, it's just no longer a harmonic progression or melodic progression, just involving some leaps and some stepwise motion too. All right, so be mindful of these three ways of avoiding parallel forbidden intervals: unison, octaves, and fifths. This way, your voice leading will become more beautiful and independent um, in your improvisations, compositions, and just harmonizations if you want to harmonize hymns. So that's hopefully was useful to you. If it was, and if the harmony is something you need more help with, I recommend my harmony for organist course level 1. We start from the beginning, and actually it's very useful to organists to start. I explain harmonic, melodic progressions, all kinds of things in greater detail than in this short tutorial. But even in this tutorial, you already grasped the main rule how to avoid parallel unisons, octaves, and fifths, which is basically apply contrary motion or use stationary voice and then stepwise motion in other voices, or stepwise motion in one voice and some leaps in other voices. Okay, thank you so much. This was Vidas, and I'll catch you online in the next video or tutorial very soon. Bye bye.